Hey, it's Steve Thomason. It is Friday morning, February 3rd, 2017, and this weekend in the Narrative Lectionary, we're going to be preaching from Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 17, the story of the centurion and the widow. And in this video, what I want to do is I want to do a visual commentary of everything that happened between last week and this week. So last week, the text was the beginning of chapter 6, where Jesus breaks the Sabbath law and Pharisees freak out about it. But there is so much that happens between verse 6:11 and chapter 7 that I just want to visually go through it because I think it's pretty important. So here we go. Here is my my opening slide for this week's sermon. We've got this contrast between this big, important, powerful figure, the centurion in Capernaum, in contrast to this poor widow who has just lost her son. And we're going to see that there's a theme going on throughout this text where the mighty is brought low and the weak are exalted. So let's go back. I just want to go back all the way to Luke chapter 3. And if you remember, when John the Baptist was out, here's John. When John the Baptist was out in the wilderness, he quoted Isaiah chapter 40. And Isaiah was saying that, when the Messiah comes, when the kingdom of God comes, he's going to take the mountains and he's going to bring them low. He's going to take the valleys. He's going to fill them up. He's going to take the crooked places and straighten them out. And he's going to take the rough places and smooth them out, which ends up looking like this. And then he adds Isaiah chapter 52, where Isaiah says that all flesh will see the salvation of God. And I think that in the Gospel of Luke, this idea of bringing the mighty down and bringing the low up is really important. I mean, we even see that, in Mary's song. We see that in the fact that Jesus was born among the animals and the poor in Bethlehem, and that the shepherds gather around his birth. So this is this recurring theme. And I want to show you that even in the text between last week and this week, we see this playing out. Okay, so here is where we pick up from last week's text. In verse 12 of chapter 6, we see that during those days, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray. Okay, so here we have Jesus up on a mountain to pray, to talk to God. And while he was up there, he calls his disciples, right? So he does this important thing on the top of the mountain. But then look what happens here in verse 17. It says, he came down with them. He came down and stood. So he comes down the mountain and he stood on a level place with a great crowd. What's interesting and what caught my eye in that is that he's about to go into his version of the Beatitudes in Luke. And Matthew's version, Matthew has Jesus going up on a mountain to give these. So here in Luke, he makes a specific point to say that he stood on a level place. And then notice who the great multitude of people were. You've got people from Judea and Jerusalem. So here you have Jews, right? But then it says, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. These are Gentiles. So even in this moment, we have Jews and Gentiles coming together, which isn't that all flesh, right? So I think that's pretty important. So then here's the teaching itself. He goes right from that moment, and he has these contrasts. The way that Luke organizes this teaching is that on one side he says, "Who are the blessed?" And then he cries out a woe to certain people. And notice the parallel here. He said, blessed are the poor And woe to you who are rich. So these are the low and these are the high. Blessed are you who are hungry now, and woe to you who are full now. Blessed are you who weep now, and woe to you who are laughing now. And blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. And woe to you when people speak well of you. So here we have the people who are in society are the exalted ones. And here we have the people who in society are the rejected and the lowly. And Jesus is blessing them, and he's bringing these down. So there's that theme. And then it goes through 4 sections in his teaching. He says, love for enemies, which, I mean, that's a great reversal, right? You don't love your enemies, but Jesus said, you have to love your enemies. And look at this really important piece right here. He says, be merciful. That is no way to win wars or to get influence, but Jesus is this great reversal. And then he says, don't judge. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. And then he this wonderful moment where you've got the guy with the log in his own eye, right? And we don't even pay attention to it, but instead we judge those who just have a tiny little speck in their eye. I mean, that's the greatest hypocrisy there is, right? And then he says, can a blind person guide a blind person? It's like, focus in on yourself first, and then you can see others clearly. And then he talks about a tree, right? He says, no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. He's talking about this isn't about external things. This is about internal things. Who are you on the inside? So he's reversing again that this is about the inside, not the outside. And then he talks about 2 foundations. What are you building your house on? Are you building your house on sand so it's washed away? Or are you building it on the foundation, the rock of this great reversal of what is the true kingdom of God at the depths of reality? And then we come into our text for today, where we have this centurion who is the great and exalted one. And it's interesting that the Jews they say he is worthy, right? Because he is our benefactor. He has built synagogues for us. And so even the Jews are showing all of these external things that make this centurion. A centurion was a soldier who was in charge of 100 other soldiers. But notice what happens to the centurion. He comes to Jesus and he says, you know what? I am not worthy. He does not see himself the way the people of Capernaum see him. And he said, I did not presume. These are actually the same Greek word, worthy. He says, I did not consider myself worthy to come to you, because this guy knows what power actually looks like. And when he sees Jesus, he sees true power. And so what's happening here, what is key to this centurion, is that he is showing humility in the face of true power, which is Jesus. And then Jesus is blown away by this guy. He's like, not even in Israel have I found such faith. And then on the other side of the story, we have this woman who is a widow. And in that society, a widow, because it was a male-dominated society, a woman needed her husband's estate in order to have her own security. And if she was a widow, it was her son that would be the one who would take care of her. Well, when the son dies, this widow is as low as you can get in society. She's destitute. Now notice what happens when Jesus sees her. It says he has compassion for her. Compassion is the word that takes calm, which means with, and passion means to suffer. So to have compassion is to suffer with. So Jesus' heart is broken for this woman. And notice what he does. His compassion moves her to action, and he touches the dead man, which makes him unclean, and rises him from the dead. And Jesus gave him to his mother. So here's the point that I'm trying to make, is that here in this story for this weekend's text, we see this theme lived out again in the narrative. We have this great and exalted centurion who is brought to humility. And then we have this destitute woman who is exalted to right standing. And the whole point of Jesus in the kingdom of God is that in the kingdom of God, we are all equally valued as children of God. So there you go. I think one last section is that here, after Jesus did these things, fear seized the people, and this fear, I think, is respect, right? And they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us," and then the word spread throughout. So here we have, again, the fulfillment of what John the Baptist was talking about when he said, "all flesh." So those are just some thoughts to think about as we prepare for Luke chapter 7, the centurion and the widow. All right, check you next time.